Well, good morning. I thought over the next few weeks we could look at the different I am statements that we find in the Gospel of John, the different I am statements that Jesus says about who he is. And this morning we're going to be looking at John chapter 6, where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. So if you've got a Bible, if you want to grab it, turn to John chapter 6. And the passage that this statement is found in is from verses 25 to 59, and I'm not going to read it all through, so if you want to pause the video now and just read this passage through for yourself, where we find this statement that Jesus says, I am the bread of life. That's John chapter 6, 25 to 59. Okay, so the context of where this passage is found is Jesus has just fed the 5,000 at the beginning of chapter 6. We see this. There's this great crowd following him. And then he feeds them until they're completely full, because they say that there were baskets of food left over. Even though they started with hardly anything, Jesus performs this miracle, and then the whole crowd are completely fed. And so where we pick this up is the next day, and the crowd are looking for Jesus. They don't know where he's gone. He's crossed over to the other side of the lake, and so the crowd follow him over there. And this is what Jesus says to the crowd when they find him. This is in verse 26. I tell you the truth, you are looking for me not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Almost as soon as the crowd reaches Jesus, he almost rebukes them and says that you're not coming to me for the miraculous signs for who I am. You're coming to me because I just gave you a load of food, because you were completely full last time you saw me, because you had your fill. And it's made me think, oh gosh, what do I go to Jesus for? Why do I go to Jesus? Am I going for him, for who he is, or am I going to have my fill? And I just wondered if that's a question for us to think about this morning. Why do we go to Jesus? And what Jesus is saying here, if we carry on in verse 27, it says, do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. Jesus is saying, in me there is so much more. In me there is so much more than just having your fill, than just having this earthly bread. In verse 35, it says, Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty. Jesus is saying, don't come to me for the stuff, but come to me for me. And I think that's a challenge, at least for me this morning, and probably for all of us this morning. Let's not go to Jesus for the stuff, but let's go to Jesus for Jesus. When I read the Gospels, when I read about the life of Jesus, I so often see that his motivation isn't always about healing, isn't always about preaching. It more often seems like his motivation or his mission here on earth is to meet people and to know people and to love people. That seems to be much more his motivation for what he does, rather than just going around and doing all these miracles. He seems so much more interested in knowing the people he comes into contact with. And I just wonder if that's his longing for us as well, as we approach him, not just to get the stuff that he gives, but I wonder if he's longing for us just to meet him and to know him and to love him, because there is so much more that Jesus can give. Let's not go to Jesus for the stuff, but let's go to Jesus for Jesus. And then just another little theme that we see in this passage. There's quite a lot written here about eternal life. In verse 27, which I read, it says, don't work for the food that spoils, but for the food that endures to eternal life. And then also down in 39, it says, and this is the will of him who sent me. This is Jesus saying, this is why I have come. That I shall lose none of those that he has given me, but raise them up at the last day. And what Jesus is saying is that his mission that he's come down for is to raise up his people, raise up us, his church. What he's saying is to give us eternal life. This is really what it's all about. It's all about the eternal life that Jesus gives. And I find this a really hard concept to come to terms with. Like you can't imagine eternal life, or can't imagine what it would be like. But this is what Jesus is saying it's all about. What he's saying is that in him there is so much more available to us. It's not just about having the bread of this world and having our fill now, but there is so much more available to us. There is life in him, and life that endures, that we will never be hungry, we will never be thirsty in him, but he gives us life eternal. And although that's a difficult concept, it's a truth that the Bible tells us, and that's what we're created for eternal life with Jesus. So just to end with this statement again, John chapter 6, verse 35. Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty." What Jesus is saying is it's only really him that satisfies us. It's only really Jesus that fulfills us and completes us. Nothing that this world can give, nothing that we can eat, nothing that we can have of this world. But we're created for a new and different life with him, an eternal life with Jesus. So he's saying, let's not go to Jesus for the stuff that he can give us, but let's go to Jesus for him, to know him and to love him and to meet with him, and to realise that that is what we are called to for eternity. So I hope that that's an encouragement. If you've got any questions or any comments, then do feel free to leave them below, or get in touch if you'd like to talk more about this. And I hope you have a really good Sunday.